My number 6 best chess game of the 1980s is Vandaloo vs. Hesseling from 1983. This game was first published by Vandaloo, the player with the white pieces, in a magazine in '84, and he said that the game came from an obscure weekend tournament in England, and his opponent, Hesseling, was German. Now, some have questioned whether the game actually was played at such a tournament, or whether possibly Vandaloo made up the game. To be honest, I don't really care because the ideas demonstrated by both sides are just too rich not to enjoy. This fantastic contest begins with the Traxler Counterattack. That opening starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4, the Italian game, and after knight f6, we get knight g5, provoking the traditional crisis here on f7. Now, tried and true is pawn to d5 here, but in the Traxler counterattack, also known as the wilkes-barre variation, black plays bishop c5. This looks like a beginner's mistake, but it is anything but that. Now, black is letting f7 hang. You can capture with the knight and with the bishop. It looks like capturing with the knight, forking the rook, and the queen might just be winning. However, actually the strongest move is bishop takes f7 check. There you have king e7, the king has lost the right to castle, and you pull back with bishop b3. You've taken a pawn and cost black the right to castle. Now, black is going to try and get some counterplay against f2, but modern computer analysis shows that this is insufficient. However, this is 1983. There's no such thing as modern computer analysis. The players did not have the ability to just fire up Stockfish and review the position. The only fish that was going to be fired up was your opponent after you unleashed your devastating preparation against them. In this game, both players are coming booked to the teeth on the Traxler counterattack. So here we see knight takes f7. White accepts the gauntlet that black has thrown down. Now, after knight takes f7, the only move, and one that is easily missed, is bishop takes f2 check, sacrificing the bishop here to open up an attack with the knight and the queen. Now, it might actually be stronger to play king f1 here. This position is extremely complicated, and even modern computer analysis does not fully understand what's going on in this line. However, in this game, white does continue to accept the gauntlet. That's going to be a theme here, and demonstrate courage with the king. King takes f2. This allows knight takes e4 check, which opens up the queen that is ready to enter the battle. And here, again, you could consider pulling the king back, and then the queen can come in. In a lot of cases, there's actually a perpetual check coming. However, white's king is going to continue to march up the board. King e3. Now, the strongest move here is actually queen to h4. When after pawn to g3, you sacrifice the knight. Knight takes, and then pawn takes, and then queen d4 check. After king f3, in this position, the best move is simply to castle, which is hilarious. White would have all kinds of great discoveries if castling did not pin the knight here on f7. The whole position just cracks me up. It looks like it might actually be stronger in this position to play d5 instead of castling. This does attack the bishop and threaten bishop g4 check with a skewer. However, in this position, white has the brilliant rook h4, and it looks like white actually gets an advantage thanks to the control of the fourth rank. In fact, control of the fourth rank is going to be a big theme in this game. Really big. So here, after king e3, black actually played queen to e7, which is a mistake. Now, in this position, white can and should capture the rook on h8. Now, you are actually going to lose your queen in the main line here, which goes queen g5 check, king takes, pawn to d5 check, bishop takes, bishop f5 check, and after the king falls back, we have the skewer. You would be very understood if in this position you actually stopped calculating and said, well, this is bad, I'm not going to do this. But if you now give up the white queen here, wreck black's pawn structure, and capture back on d1, then you're actually much, much better here as white. Black gave up a lot of material to win the queen, and even though this knight here is trapped on h8, after black gets that knight, black is still not going to have material equality. White is much better, maybe winning. So, in the game, after queen to e7, white did not capture the rook on h8. Instead, white played pawn to c3, covering d4. Now, in this position, the strongest move for black with computer analysis turns out to be pawn to d5. And here, you just simply sacrifice all the pieces and you win the game. There's bishop takes d5, queen c5, exclamation point, king takes e4, bishop f5 check in this position, 2 exclamation points for that one. King takes f5, queen takes d5, and after knight takes h8, white is up just about all the material. But it turns out that black is winning here after knight e7 check and then capturing on g2. White can actually block this check with the queen here, but then after capturing the rook, black has gotten a good bit of material back, and deep computer analysis shows that black is actually winning due to the exposed, very exposed position of the white king. However, in a practical game, who knows what would happen from this position? In the game, though, black tried another audacious move. c3 was designed to prevent knight d4, and black says, I'm coming in anyway. Now in this position, white can actually capture either knight. Which one should you capture? Well, the correct answer here is to not capture either of them. Just play pawn to d3. This is the strongest computer defense here. It opens up room for the king to eventually hide. Black is really struggling for counterplay in this position. If you capture the knight here on d4, then after the capture back with the pawn, the king is in a precarious spot, and a lot of the moves are going to lead to forks and other problems, tactical problems, and black is actually better, probably winning in this crazy position. However, white decided on another crazy position. White in the game played king takes e4. We've already seen great courage from the white king. That's not stopping anytime soon. This king is going to be displaying some incredible courage throughout this game. Here, after king takes e4, we get queen h4 check, and king e3 and queen f4 check. Now, you could have a perpetual check in this position after king d3 because the black queen could shuffle on these squares. That would be maybe a fair result to the game, but black has better and seeks better. In this position, black plays d5, a very strong move. This obviously opens up the bishop and brings more pressure to bear against the white king. White captures that pawn on d5. We get bishop f5 check. The king is running up again, king c4, the second time that the king has reached the 4th rank. And now b5 check, another exclamation point move. In this position, king c5. The king finally reaches the 5th rank here on move 14. This is a great moment to pause your video and try to figure out how you can get at this king here on c5. The strongest and most direct move here is queen to h4. The queen steps to the edge of the board to threaten coming back to the center of the board and delivering a quick checkmate. In this position, we should of course ask if white can capture the knight on d4. The answer is very definitely no. After c takes d4, queen takes d4 check, the rook is coming to b8 and its mate in just a couple of moves. So after queen to h4, what we actually saw was knight takes e5. The knight steps back to the middle of the board, and among other things, it removes the defender of the knight on d4 so that white's king can potentially capture it and retreat to the center of the board. In this position, black plays another really beautiful and unique move, castles queenside. The threat here is to play rook takes d5 check, and then after king takes, to bring the other rook to d8 and force a very, very quick checkmate. So in this position, if again you capture the knight, then there's rook takes d5, king takes, rook d8, king c6, and after queen takes d4, it's mate in just a couple of moves. The most you can survive is after king takes, rook d5 check, and then king c6 and rook c5 is checkmate. So after castling, we see white play c4 to defend the bishop here on d5 so that the rook cannot sacrifice itself on d5. However, that does not stop black. Black still plays rook takes d5 check, which is an excellent move. After rook takes d5, if the king captures, then we have a very quick checkmate after rook to d8 and then queen to e7 and mate on the board. So After rook takes, it is the pawn that captures in this position. The rook comes to d8, and there's still a threat to sacrifice on d5. If, for example, rook e1, then rook takes, and the queen comes back to her starting square to deliver checkmate after king c5, queen d6. There are so many beautiful checkmates in this game. So after rook to d8, white is still defending knight c3 so that the knight defends d5. Now, in this position, there are several wins for black. One that I think is fairly direct is pawn to a5. This adds support for the queen to introduce checkmate threats along the fourth rank, such as queen to b4 mate. So there is the idea of knight to e6 and then queen to b4 mate. If you try to defend that with something like pawn to a3 to cover the b4 square, you can still sacrifice the knight on e6 here. And if the king captures on b5, the only winning move, but a winning move, is queen to d4, recentralizing the queen with all kinds of mating threats, including queen b6 and then knight c5, or sometimes rook takes d5 and bishop d3, and just a lot of other things. There's no way for white to defend. So after knight e6, if the pawn captures on e6 in this position, you have queen d4 check, the king can capture on b5, but then queen b6, king back to a4, rook to d4, and white can block, but then you can sacrifice the rook for a very nice queen and helper mate on the edge of the board. So this would have been decisive. Pawn to a5 in this position would have won the game for black. However, black tries another spectacular move, knight to c6, which misses the direct win. Now, in this position, I encourage you to pause your video, find possibly the most spectacular theoretical novelty of all time, and find the other spectacular move in this position that has basically the same idea and is even stronger. The whole point of black's last move is to open up the fourth rank so that the queen can deliver mate in a variety of ways. The knight on c6 cannot be captured. If you capture with the knight, there's mate in 1, the knight is needed to defend c4. If you capture here with the pawn, then the queen simply comes over to d4 now because you've opened up the d file, and after king takes b5, queen b6, wherever the king goes, there is rook to d4 and mate follows. You could also consider capturing here with the king here, but after king takes, then in this position, queen b4 is the critical move, and the idea of rook to d6 and bishop d7 are enough to win the game. So it's all about that fourth rank. What is white to do against the attack on the fourth rank? In the game, the spectacular move queen to a4 was played. This is a stunning idea to give up the queen here to break black's mating threats. If the pawn captures the queen, then there is knight takes c6. Now in this position, bishop d3 still leads to a dangerous attack, but there's no clear way through for black. However, there is an even more incredible idea that is stronger according to Stockfish. It is, instead of queen to a4, queen to g4, with the same basic idea of breaking up the attack on the fourth rank, but evidently, according to the engine, doing it in a better way. After bishop takes g4, again you do knight takes c6, and here black doesn't seem to have any strong attack. The game is extremely complicated. Anything can happen, just like actually happens in this game. However, white is not busted. There's more analysis here if you want to check it out in my notes. However, let's get back to the game where queen a4 was actually played. So after queen to a4, black decided on queen to e7 check here, continuing the attack. Now we have king takes b5, and then in this position, the strongest move is actually knight takes e5 according to the engine, when ideas like bishop to d3 are decisive. White cannot seem to hold on. However, it was actually the queen that captured on e5 in the game. Queen takes e5. Now, d5 is obviously critical here, so we get queen to c4, holding on to d5, and the defensive d5 actually gives white a tenable position. In this position, we see knight to d4 check. Strongest here would be king to a5, staying on a dark square. Instead, king a4 was played, which is a little worse because the bishop is able to be introduced into the attack. King to a5, knight c6 check, king to a6, and here knight to b8 check. Now, This white king has continued to display courage all game long. White's not about to back down now. But the better move here was actually to admit that king a6 was a mistake and pull back with king a5 and then try to make your way back down the board. Instead, white says, I see a pawn. I'm going to take a pawn. Also, don't I get to become a queen if I reach the other side of the board? Unfortunately, no. After king takes a7 here, this is a good moment to pause the video and try to find a winning idea for black. Just before that incredible queen to a4 move, we were talking about how critical the 4th rank was to those mating ideas. In this position, it is the 6th rank, and queen to d6 or queen to f6 are checkmating. Slightly more accurate is queen d6 and the ideas of queen to b6, queen b7, or queen to a6 if the white queen moves are overwhelming. There's simply no way for white to defend. In the game, black tried pawn to c6. The idea here is to mate with queen c7, but white has a defense. It is the move knight to b5, which black must have missed. Now white is once again in the game and even winning. Now we have bishop to f5, pawn to d4. Finally, this bishop is breathing a little bit. Rook to d7 check, king to a8. If only kings promoted when they reach the opposite rank. White could have a new queen, and there would be no way for white to lose the game because you would have no more king to checkmate. So after king a8 in this position, we see queen to e7, which is almost threatening rook to a7, knight takes queen b7 and checkmate, except that when the knight captures a sacrificed rook on a7, it will be check against the king on c8, so you can't sacrifice the rook to get the queen to this mating square. So in this position, white captures on c6. The rook is under attack here, and there's nowhere good for the rook to go. So black plays the very clever bishop to e4, definitely the only move that keeps a fight in the position. This pins the pawn on c6 to the king on a8, so it cannot capture on d7 with double discovered check. So after bishop e4, we see pawn to d5, cutting off the diagonal leading to a8, and now bishop takes d5. And now in this position, white must surrender the queen with queen takes d5. Here there is rook takes d5 and knight to a7 check. After knight to a7 check in this position, the king goes to d8. If you go to c7, then there is bishop f4. This bishop is dying to lunge into the action. So after knight to a7, king d8 in this position, white should continue development. Bishop f4 and white is winning. Instead, white tried king takes b8. Once again, this audacious king that basically wins the game for white goes a little bit too far and should be punished. In this position, black picks the wrong check. The right check is queen to b4. The king is forced back into the corner, and then after king c7, there is no defense to the various mating ideas in this position. White ends up busted. However, in the game, the queen checks on c7. And then after king a8, black plays rook a5 when it's basically mate, right? We're threatening 3 different mates in one. However, white is able to play bishop g5, sacrificing the bishop to develop the rooks. Once the rooks get in the game here, unfortunately for black, black is busted. Now we have king e8, rook h to e1 check, king f8, and rook to d7. It is time to double rooks on the 7th rank. This is just amazing and hilarious. White is down the queen, but totally winning thanks to the rooks double on the 7th rank, which for the first time in chess history are both creating a dangerous attack against the opponent's king and protecting your king. So here, after doubling the rooks on the 7th rank, we get queen takes g2, rook b7. White might have had more efficient wins, but ultimately white's strategy of pushing the pawns is enough to complete the game very, very effectively. So we get some checks. You can never capture, of course, because of the discovered checks and promotions. So pawn to b4, pawn to a4, the white pawns are pushing forward on the queen side. And eventually here, after knight c6, we get rook takes g7 and black resigns. Even better is rook to e7 in this position here, rook e7 check and king f8, and then rook to c8 or b8, forcing mate. but rook takes g7 is good enough, and the game ends here. Did this game actually happen? I really don't know. Again, many people think that it's made up by the white player, but everything about this game to me says human. Whether or not it was a human creation or actually played between two humans, there is so much brilliance and also error in the game that it is the most human game I think I've ever seen. I hope that you've enjoyed this game. I encourage you to check out more of my favorite games from the 1980s. They are sitting right on top of your screen.